All right. Can everybody hear me? Welcome. Welcome to this year's Tabula Poetica reading series. We have one more visiting poet in the series, so mark your calendar for November 12th. Jessica Piazza will give a talk at 1 p.m. and do her reading right back here at 4 p.m. on November 12th. In addition, our whole series concludes each fall with a reading by MFA students. So if you are one of those MFA students in the class that's going to read, raise your hand. Okay, so here's the future readers that you need to come see on December 17th, and that's at 4 o'clock as well. Pull out your cell phone and tweet or Facebook that you're here so everybody knows how cool you are. And then silence or turn off your cell phone for the remainder of the reading. I need to thank some of the people and organizations that make Tabula Poetica possible. We've got a great team of poetry lovers on this campus, and we all work together to make this series and some other things happen. Most of the support for this project comes from the English department, and I especially want to thank our department chair, Joanna Levin, who just walked in. So round of applause for Joanna Levin. In addition, we have two fantastic administrative assistants in the department, Debbie Thacker and Kristen Laxo, and all the logistics, including the food at the back of the room, is due to their organization. And then I also have a graduate assistant, David Krausman, who helps me out with the series and other Tabula Poetica projects. And David is here, so give him a round of applause too. In addition, this year, I go around asking for more support, and we have support from the Dean of Students Office, the Department of History, the Rogers Center for Holocaust Education, and the Chancellor's Office. And finally, I want to thank especially Charlene Baldwin. She's the Dean of Leatherby Libraries, and we're all gathered here in the library, and she is one of the biggest supporters of Tabula Poetica. Every single year, she's cheerleading and offering her space for these readings. I want to encourage you, if you haven't stopped at the back of the room for refreshments, we've got some snacks at the back of the room. Also, Ilya Kaminsky brought some extra copies of his book. It seemed like most of you, or at least most rows, had a copy of his book so that you can follow along. He may warn you that he has a thick accent. It takes only about 30 seconds to get used to it. But if you want to follow along and you don't have a book, we have some extras that you can borrow for the reading. In addition, we may have some time at the end for Q&A, and also definitely if you do have a book and you want it signed, the poet will stick around after for book signing. I'm not actually going to introduce the poet this evening. My esteemed colleague, Dr. Kevin O'Brien, will introduce the poet, and I want to point out that Kevin speaks Russian, so he's already been speaking with the poet in Russian, and Kevin's interests include 20th century avant-garde Russian art and literature, and basically all things poetry. So if there's a literature professor in the English department who you mention poetry and he kind of swoons, that's Kevin O'Brien. So welcome.
Okay, so I find most oral introductions to writers deadly in their sameness, so bear with me. A biographical sketch is always followed by a list of publications and awards, so I'm going to try to make this part brief. The Russian poet Osip Mandelstam has a wonderful phrase, which is poetic hunger. And I'm assuming that you, like I, are quite hungry for the meal that's going to follow. So consider this zakuski, which in Russian means hors d'oeuvres. So this is just a little beginning. Ilya Kaminsky was born in a Russian-speaking Jewish family in Odessa, which is a magical city on the Black Sea in the Ukraine. His family emigrated to the United States in 1993. At the enviable age of 27, and this should give you hope, his book Dancing in Odessa won the Dorset Prize and the Metcalf Award of the American Academy of Arts. More importantly, the book was much admired and praised by major poets. He is the co-editor of the Echo Book of International Poetry, a collection that I recommend to all poets and poetry lovers out there. It's absolutely amazing what's included in it. And as John Ashbery has written, it contains an amazing spectrum of poetic voices that is immediately indispensable. Other books of Kaminsky's own poetry include Musica Umana and Dancing in Chelsea, and in addition to co-edited books of translations of and homages to other poets. The latter include a book called Gossip and Metaphysics, Russian Modernist Poems and Prose, and then volumes devoted to Polina Barskova, Marina Tsvetaeva, and Paul Celan, wonderful poets. He also co-edited A God in the House, Poets Talk About Faith. He teaches English and comparative literature and translation at San Diego State University. So that's the deadly introduction. Okay, now. In an early essay by Mandelstam on the nature of the word, he speaks of what he calls domestic Hellenism. That is, a relationship of poetic language to the world which makes of the earth a home. In his words, and this is a quote, Hellenism is a baking dish, a pair of tongs, an earthenware jug with milk. It is domestic utensils, crockery, the body's whole immediate environment. Hellenism is any stove near which a man sits, prizing its warmth as something related to his own inner warmth, the humanization of the surrounding world. Though Ilya Kaminsky writes in Dancing in Odessa, I was born in the city named after Odysseus, and I praise no nation. When I read that collection, I felt again and again his passionate warmth and sense of kindredness with place, with beloved people, and especially with beloved poets. Kaminsky ends a deeply moving lyric on another Russian poet, Marina Tsvetaeva, for example, with these words, all I want is a human window in a roof whose house is my life. In another essay by Mandelstam, though, called A Conversation About Dante, rather than poetry as homemaking, we encounter the word as endless journey. I quote, what distinguishes poetry from automatic speech is that it rouses us and shakes us awake in the middle of a word. Then the word turns out to be far longer than we thought, and we remember that to speak means to be forever on the road. Here's the conclusion so we can get it. Okay, I just have to turn the page and it's sticking. Okay, what I find so unique and moving in the poetry of Ilya Kaminsky is the earnestness and eloquence with which it grapples with these two poles, that of kinship with the world and the forever on the road journey of language itself. I'm sure I speak for everyone here in saying I can't wait to hear the meal Ilya Kaminsky will be sharing with us this afternoon. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you so much. I really don't deserve that, but thank you. And thank you so much, Anna, for having me here. Thank you. Yes, I speak with a really heavy accent, and yes, you're going to suffer if you don't have a copy of the book. So please raise your hand and I'll give you one. Okay, the first poem on the page 1, and it's called Author's Prayer. Can you hear me okay? Because I can hear you also. Oh, over there, okay. Is that better? Okay. Author's Prayer. If I speak for the dead, I must leave this animal off my body. I must write the same poem over and over for an empty page, the white flag of their surrender. If I speak for them, I must walk on the edge of myself. I must leave at a blind man who runs through the rooms without touching the furniture. Yes, I live. I can cross the streets asking what is it. I can dance in my sleep and laugh in front of the mirror. Even sleep is a prayer, Lord. I will praise your madness and in a language not mine. Speak of music that wakes us, music in which we move. For whatever I say is a kind of petition of the darkest days. Must I praise? Right, let's go on to page 6. And by now you realize that you really need a copy if you don't have one. Okay. Page 6 is a poem called In Praise of Laughter. In Praise of Laughter. Where are these bandits trading in a city that belongs to no nation but all the nations of wind? She spoke the speech of poplar trees, her ears trembling as she spoke. My antros composite odes to barbershops, drugstores. Her soul, vaulting on 2 feet, the soul or no soul, a child's allowance. She loved street musicians and knew that my grandfather composed lectures on the supply and demand of clothes in our country. This day declared him an enemy of the people. He ran after a train with tomatoes in his coat and danced naked on a table in front of our house. He was shot. My grandmother raped by the public prosecutor who stuck his pen in her vagina, the pen which signed people off for 20 years. But in a secret history of anger, 1 month's silence lives in the bodies of others as we dance to keep from falling. Between the doctor and the prosecutor and my family, the people of Odessa, woman with huge breasts, old man naive and childlike hollow voice, hops of burning feathers that rise and rise with each return. And a little poem on the next page, page 7, is called Maestro. Maestro. What is memory? What makes a body glow on April orchid in Moldova and the schools bombed? When the schools are bombed, sadness is forbidden. I wet the snow and I feel my body sway. The screaming yells, 347 voices in a story of a doctor saving them. His hand trapped under a wall, his granddaughter dying nearby. She whispers, I don't want to die, I have eaten such apples. He touches her mouth as a blind man within lips and yells, shut up, I am near the window, I'm asking for help. Speaking. He cannot stop speaking. In the dark of Bram Chopin, he speaks to them to calm them. A doctor, yes, whatever window framed his life. Outside, tomatoes grew, clouds passed, and we once lived. A doctor, with the death of a parent on his trapped arm, seeing his granddaughter's cheekbone is no longer her cheekbone. Surgical precision stitches suffering and grace. 2 days pass. He shuts in his windows, there is no window. When the rescue approaches, he speaks of Chopin. Chopin. They cut off his hand. Nurses say he's doing okay. In my dream he stands feeding bread to pigeons, surrounded by pigeons, birds on his head, his shoulder. He just you don't understand, and then he is breathing himself to sleep. The city sleeps. there is no such city. Let's do something happier. Let's go on to page 10. The poem is called My Mother's Tango. I now see her windows open in the rain, laundry in the windows. She rides a white pony for my birthday, a white pony on a 7th floor. And where will we keep it? On a balcony, the pony nating on a balcony for 9 weeks, yes. At the center of my life, my mother dances, yes, here. As in childhood, my mother asks to describe the stages of my heavens. She speaks of soups, she is of their talent. Between the regiment of saucers and towels, she moves so fast, she is motionless, opening and closing doors. But what was happiness? A pony on a balcony, my mother's pasta clock she wore on her shoulder. I ran axes through the afternoon to see her 60 court in a foreign language, young, not young. My mother gallops a pony on a 7th floor. She becomes a stranger, and knocks herself, opens, put a shot, shuts, put it open. On the next page is a little love poem. Are you awake? More or less? Okay. A little love poem called American Tourist. In a city made of seaweed, we dance it on a rooftop, my hands under her breasts, subtracting day from day. I add this woman's sun calls to my days of atonement, hurl over lips the formal bonies of her face. We were made in love a evening. Out of her stories, the rituals of rain, happiness is money, yes, but only the smallest coins. She asked me to pray, to bow towards Jerusalem. We bowed to the left, I saw two bakeries, a shoe store, the smell of hay, smell of horses and hay. When Moses broke the sacred tablets on Sinai, the rich picked the pieces, carved with adultery and kill and death, the poor got only no. I kissed the back of her neck, and Elba, this woman who's forgetting, is a plot against forgetting, naked in her galoshes, she waltzed, and even her cat waltzed. She said, oh, that is musical and us is memory, but I didn't know English. I danced sitting down, she straightened it and bent and straightened it. A tremble of music, a tremble in her hand. On the next page is a little poem called Dancing in Odessa, on page 12. We live in north of the future. There is open it letters with a child's signature, a raspberry, a page of sky. My grandmother threw tomatoes from her balcony. She pulled imagination like a blanket over my head. I painted my mother's face. She understood loneliness, hid the dead in the earth like partisans. The night undressed us. I counted its pulse. My mother danced. She filled the past with species casseroles. At this my doctor laughed. His granddaughter touched my eyelid. I kissed the back of her knees. I see it trembled. A hot ship said sail. And my classmate invented 20 names for Jew. He was an angel. He had no name. We wrestled, yes. My grandfather's fought the German tanks and tractors. I kept a suitcase full of Brodsky spoons. The city trembled. A host ship set in sail. At night, I woke to whisper, yes, we live it. We live it, yes, don't say it was a dream. At the local factory, my father took a handful of snow, put it in my mouth, the son began a routine narration, whitening their bodies, mother, father, dancing movement, as the darkness spoke behind them. It was April. The sun washed the balcony, April. I read out the stories, the light etches into my hand. Little book, go to the city without me. Are you tired yet? A little bit? The next poem is a longer poem, so bear with me. It's a piece called Musica Humana, and it's an elegy for a great Russian poet, Osip Mandelstam. If you don't know who he is while we are in the library, it's really easy to find out. All you need to know for the purpose of this poem is that Mandelstam was a great Russian poet who happened to live during the Stalin's government. The time was 1930s. The place was former USSR. It means that he was sent into exile where he died. And his wife Nadezhda, who is also mentioned in this poem, survived. That's all you need to know. The poem is both in verse and prose, and sometimes is spoken in voices of Osip and Nadezhda Mandelstam. Okay? We're on the same page, more or less? We start on page 15. Oh yeah, I believe Carolyn Forscher was, yes, she was my teacher and she made me write this poem. So hi, Carolyn. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful poet. Musica Humana. A modern Orpheus. Sent to hell, he never returned. While his widow searched across 1/6 of the earth's surface, clutching the saucepan with his sons rolled up inside, memorizing them by night in case they were found by furious with a search warrant. While there is still some light on the page, he escapes in a stranger's coat with his wife, and the clothes smells of sweat. A dog runs after them, licking the earth where they walked and sat. In a kitchen, on a stairwell, above the toilet, he will show her the way to silence. They will leave the radio told into itself, making love. They turn off the lights, but the neighbor has binoculars and he watches. That's settling on his lips. It is the 1930s. Petersburg is a frozen ship. The cathedral's cafes down Nevsky Prospect, they move as a new state sticks its pins into them. In Crimea, he gathered together rich liberals and said to them strictly, on the judgment day, if you asked it, whether you understood the poet Osip Mandelstam, say no. How will you fight him? You must answer, yes. I'm reading aloud the book of my life on earth and confess I love it grapefruit. In a kitchen sausages tasting vodka, the men raise their cups. A boy in a white shirt, I dip my finger into sweetness. Mother watches behind my ears, and we speak of everything that has not come true, which is to say, it was Avgust, the light in the trees full of fury, Avgust filling hands with a language that tastes like smoke. Now, memory, pour some beer, salts the rim of the glass, you who are writing me, have what you want, a golden coin. My turn to put it under. The younger brother of a cloud, he walks unshaven in dark green pants. In cathedrals he falls on his knees, praying happiness. His words in the floor are the skeletons of dead birds. I have loved, yes. Watched my hand spoke of loyalty to the earth. Now there's a lover boy counts my fingers. I escape, and I'm caught, escape again, and I'm caught, escape, and I'm caught. In the sun, the singer is a clay figure. Poetry is a self. And is this the self? Elsewhere, St. Petersburg stands like a lost youth whose churches, chips, and guillotines accelerate our lives. In summer 1924, Osip Mandelstam brought his young wife to St. Petersburg. Nadezhda was what the French call loudmouth charmant. An eccentric. Of course he was. His real student down the staircase for complaining he wasn't published. Osip Stratin was Sappho, was Jesus Christ. poet is a voice, I say, like Icarus, whispering to himself as he falls. Yes, my life has a broken branch in a wind hits the northern ground. I'm writing now a history of snow, the lamplight buzzing the ships that sail across the page, but uncertain afternoons. The Republic of Psalms opens up, and I grow frightened that I haven't lived, it died not enough to scratch this ecstasy into vowels here, splashes of clear biblical speech. I read Plato, Augustine. The loneliness of their syllables while Icarus keeps falling. And I read Akhmatova. Her rich weight binds me to the earth. The not written a tear is breathing the dry air that I light. Yes, I leave it. They stayed humming up by the feet. I saw St. Petersburg daughters once. I learned the grammar of Galsaray and found myself for good down pushed in street while memory sat in a corner, erased me with a sponge. I have made mistakes. Yes, in bed. I compared government to my girlfriend. Government. And then I got a barber's hand trimming off the skin, all of us dancing happily around him. He sat on the edge of his chair and dreamt aloud of good dinners. He composed his poems, not at his desk, but in the streets of St. Petersburg. He adored the image of the rooster tearing apart the night under the walls of Acropolis with his song. Like a tap into a cell, he was banging on the door. You have got to let me out. I wasn't made for prison. Once or twice in his life, a man is peeled like apples. What is left is a voice that splits his being down to the center. We see obscenity, fright, mud, but there is joy of shape. There is always more than one silence. Between here and Nevsky Prospect, ears bird like stretch prey for this man who lived on bread and tomatoes, while ducks recited his poetry in each street. Yes, Count March, July, weave them together with as red it is time. Lord, press this words against your silence. This story is told of a man who escapes and is captured into the prose of evenings. After making love, he sits up on a kitchen floor, eyes wide open, speaks of the Lord's emptiness in whose image we are made. He is out of work. And when Sylvie were endured, he is teasing his wife's neck so the skin of her belly tightens. One would think of a boy, learn syllables with his tongue, and a woman's skin. Those are lines of entirely of silence. Nadezhda, his wife, looks up from the page and speaks. Osip, Akhmatova, and I were standing together when Mandelstam melted with joy. Several little girls ran past us, imagining themselves to be horses. The first one stopped and passionately asked him, "Where is the last horsey?" I grabbed Mandelstam by his hand to prevent him from joining. And Akhmatova, too, sensing danger, whispered, "Do not run away from us. You're our last horsey." Nadezhda continues to speak. As I die, I walk barefoot across my country. Here a winter builds the strongest solitude. Tractors break into centaurs and gallops the plain speech. I'm 23, we live in a cocoon, the butterflies are mating. As he puts his fingers into fire, he gets up early, walking around in his sandals, right slowly, prayers fall into the room. Moths are watching him from the window. As his thumb passes over my skin, I see his face from underneath, its in clarity. Thus Nadezhda speaks, standing in an orange light. Her hands are quiet, talking to themselves. So God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, and your scale of good and evil, put a plate of form food. Nadezhda continues to speak. When my husband returned from Voronezh, in his mouth he hid a silver spoon. In his dreams down Nevsky Prospect, the dictator ran like a wolf after his past, a wolf with sleep in his eyes. He believed in the human being, couldn't cure himself of Petersburg. He recited by heart phone numbers of the dead. Oh, what he told in a low voice, the unspoken words became the traces of violence. When he slapped Tolstoy in the face, it was good. But they took my husband. Each word disappeared in the book. They watched him as he spoke. The vowels had teeth marks. And they said, you must leave him alone. For already behind his back the stones circle all by themselves and fall. And the last page of this poem. Osip had thick eyelashes to the middle of his cheeks. We were walking alone past a street. What we were talking about, I don't remember. We turned at the Gogol Boulevard and Osip said, I'm ready for that. At his arrest, they were searching for poems all over the floor. We sat in one room. On the other side of a wall, at neighbors, a Hawaiian guitar was playing. In my presence, the investigator found the wolf and showed it to Osip. He nodded slightly. Taking his leave, he kissed me. He was led away at 7 a.m. At the end of each vision, Mandelstam stands with a cloud of words, roving beats at the passers-by. You will recognize him, Lord. He hated Tsarskaya Selo, told Mayakovsky, stop reading your verse, you're not a Romanian orchestra. But when harmony was, it raveled and unraveled. Nadezhda said the snow fell inside her. She heard the voice of young chickens all over her flesh. Nadezhda, how yes and no are difficult to tell apart. She dances a skirt tucked between her thighs and the light is drenching in. In each room's four corners, he's making love to her earlobes, brows, weaving days and nights. He's traveling across her kitchen, touching furniture, a small propeller in his head, turning as he speaks. Outside, a boy pissing against a tree. A beggar cursing at his cat. The summer 1938, the walls were hot. The sun beat against the city slab, the city that loved to say yes to the powerful. At the end of each vision, he rubbed her feet with milk. She opened her body, lay on his stomach. We will meet in Petersburg, he said. We have buried the sun there. All right, let me just read a couple of love poems and I'll be out of your hair, okay? Thank you for your patience. Thank you, Victoria, for the wonderful day of talking about poetry as well. Let's go on to page 31, and I'll just read some pages from a longer love poem called Natalia. We'll start in the middle on page 31. I don't have that much time probably, so I'll just read the top of the page. If you want to read the bottom of the page, you can do it on your when you got the book. Okay. Natalia. On the night I met her, Rabbi Sang and sighted, God sleeps on his brow, Torah in his arms. I unfastened her stock and swore that I have stopped for her. She slept in my bed, I slept in a chair. She slept in a chair, I slept in the kitchen. She left her slippers in my shower, in my Torah, her slippers in each sentence I spoke. I said that I love, die, grow old, are born. But I love the stubbornness of her bed clothes. I bite them, taste, but closes the sweet mechanisms of pillows and covers. I see this woman. She dances without a shirt, covering what she could. We lay together on Yom Kippur, chosen by our own gods, the people of a book, broken by a book. Next page. Let me kiss you inside your elbow. Natalia, sister of the careful, he spoke of gratitude, his fingers trembling as he spoke. She unfastened the bottoms of his trousers to learn two languages, one for uncles and one for remembering. Or maybe she thought it was bad luck to have a dressed man in the house. With an eyebrow pencil, she painted his mustache. It might have wanted to touch him, and she didn't. She opened her robe and closed it, opened it and closed it again. She whispered, "Come here," nervous. He followed her, and he stepped off. Next page. We fell in love, and 8 years passed. 8 years carefully I dissect this number. We have lived with 3 cats in 5 cities, learning how man ages invisibly. 8 years, 8, I chilled lemon vodka and we kiss it on the floor among the peels of lemons. And each night, looking up, we saw ourselves, a man and a woman whispering, "Lord, one word the soul destroys," to make clear how magical it is to live. It rained at the market. With my finger she bit out her iambics in the back of our largest casserole, and we sang, "Sweet dollars, why aren't you in my pockets?" And the final one on page 34 is called Envoy. And the epigraph is actually true. In 1992, somebody said, "You will die on a boat from Yalta to Odessa." So here's an envoy. What ties me to this earth? In Massachusetts, the birds force themselves into my lands. The sea repeats itself, repeats. I bless the boat from Yalta to Odessa, and bless each passenger, his bones, his genitals, bless the sky inside his body. The sky, my medicine, the sky, my country. I bless the continent of gulls, the argument of their order, the wind, my master, in the sense the joy of poplars, flowers. Bless one woman's brows, her lips, and their thought, bless the roundness of her shoulder, her face, a lantern by which I live my life. You can find us, love. She's a woman dancing with her eyes closed, and I'm a man arguing with this woman among nightstands and tables and chairs. Lord, give us what you have already given. Thank you.
So we do have time for a couple of questions. So I'll open it up for questions. And yes, if you don't have questions, we'll just stand up here and chat. This happened last time too, and I think it means all my students are going to get an F today. Oh, did you hear that? They woke up. So here's my first question. I have 2 questions I want to ask. One is, can you talk other people in this series have talked a little bit about translation, and I'm wondering if you could talk translation. I'm wondering if you could talk about the relationship of Russian and English in your thinking and your writing.
That's a hard question. I'm going to answer it badly, but I'll try. Well, I was born in Russia. Ukraine, actually, former USSR. And the city where I was born isn't really Russian. It's very much a city that speaks its own language in a way. If you are fiction writers, you have probably heard Isaac Babel, who's a great prose writer, short story writer. And he kind of captured that Adyasa language, Adyasa talk in his prose for the first time. And that was probably the first time I was really interested in literature. Partly because Adyasa language was a combination of Russian, Ukrainian, Greek, Yiddish, and 4 or 5 other languages in Russian language. They all have imprinted themselves in Russian. And when I was growing up, younger than you, I was 16 when I left, that language was not encouraged by the Soviets, so you would never see it in a book. And Babel's books at that time were really hard to get. So the first time I remember, probably 12, 13, coming home and on the kitchen table there was that book, my mom was reading it, and I just saw the words on the page and it was really weird because I never expected literature to be like that. And that was the first time I was interested in literature simply because it came alive. So I don't know if I can call myself a Russian more than just a person from Odessa. Having said that, English was something very different. I never planned to write in English. I had no burning ambition to write in English whatsoever. A year after we came to this country, my father died, and that was very traumatic for anybody, I imagine. And I knew, at that time I was already writing poems. You know, all of us are writing poems, but when we're young and only fools like you and me keep going. I knew that if I would write in Russian about my father, it would really hurt my family. It's not fun, at least where I come from, to put somebody real into pretty verses. It felt wrong. But I had to do what I had to do. I couldn't stop, and the English was a language that my family didn't speak, and I didn't really speak. So it was a very private affair. But I'm kind of probably not really answering your question about translation. I don't really think it is possible to translate Russian poetry simply because Russian literature is so damn young. Pushkin, Russian Shakespeare, they call him, was writing in, say, 1824. He was writing his great Russian epic, Evgeny Onegin, a novel in verse. What the hell is 1824 for English literature? Byron was dead by 1824, and who the hell is Byron? I mean, before English literature could have ended in 1824 and still been a great body of work. That tells you how young Russian literature is. Anthropologically speaking, like, who's qualified to translate Akhmatova? I mean, John Donne is qualified to translate her. You see what I mean? It's just a very different stage of language. Having said that, once we establish that translation is impossible, the real fun begins, because then we have so much freedom to change English, to bring in a different sensibility into English, a different voice into English, a different color, a different tone. And just to give you another idea of how very different Russian literature is from English, I use, right now there's a contemporary Russian poet, Vera Pavlova, who is quite known for writing erotic poetry, really good at it. She's also known as pretty much the first poet, not even the first female poet, because all the dead white men before her, but the first poet in a Russian language to write mainly erotic poetry. Can you imagine the kind of literature that would not even have that before? Russian literature has so much civic poetry, which we don't really have much at all. In English, and by civic, I don't at all mean traditional state poetics, not at all. There's a whole tradition, the whole genre of civic poetry, a poet as a citizen. Pushkin said you may or may not be a poet, but you must be a citizen first. And in America, who is a citizen? You know, we just don't have that, for better or worse. So the differences are tremendous, but the beauty is when we collage them together, because something new is born. You know, literature would not exist without translation. If you just in a very, very basic sense, like Poetry 101, they introduced it to Sestina, Will, and Alsanian. None of those things come from English, say Italian forms. Pantum comes from Asia. Okay, so English literature is constantly renewed by translation.
Okay, I think the lesson there was if you want to write about family secrets, learn a foreign language that your family doesn't know. My next question is, in the book you have lineated poetry and then you have prose poetry. Can you talk about the relationship between the lineated work and the paragraphs, and also whether you see a gray area between poetry and prose?
I actually don't think of them as prose poems. I think of them as just paragraphs, as you said. And I did have a reason for putting them there, which I'll mention in a moment. Before I go into that, I don't think we really need to divide it as much, poetry and prose into camps. King James' Bible is poetry. As far as I'm concerned, Garcia Marquez' 100 Years of Solitude is poetry. As far as I'm concerned, Virginia Woolf was the greatest poet of the 20th century. Okay, so the division is very recent. You could say that poetry was there before prose, and the only division that exists comes from prose, but that's me being snobbish. In my personal case, you probably notice if you read Music and Humana that those prose blocks are there for kind of a momentum. Also, I felt very uneasy writing with a personal pronoun in the voice of a poet who's 100 times bigger than me. The reason why I wrote the Mandelstam poem is because I was just, I still am utterly in love with that body of work, and can't get it out of my brain and my physical body. And I just had to have those lines in me, in my book, and the only way I could get away with stealing his lines is writing a poem about him. But having written a poem about him, there is this martyr, a person who was truly a martyr, so who am I to speak of him? And the only way I could justify it to myself is to have this prose prop. They're almost like stage in which actors are. And all the information in prose actually did happen. Yes, he did throw a person down the stairs shouting that Jesus Christ wasn't published. That really did happen. And that gave me kind of, not an excuse, but kind of faith that what I was doing was not utterly wrong, that it was okay, it was a kind of a homage, that documentary voice in the background. In the book as a whole, there are prose passages as well, and that happened very late in the book. A lot of poems in the book, love poems in Natalia, for example, are very high style. And I felt that the style was too high, and I needed to have more of the vulgar, if you will, more of the katalas, if you know Latin poetry, more of the, not necessarily erotic, but physical, real world on a page. And I wanted the two voices to clash, to speak against each other. More like a Mozartian and rock and roll, if you will. And the prose kind of allowed me, at least in my head, I'm not saying any of it actually happens on a page, but when you write a book, you need to make peace with yourself first. And it allowed me to make peace with myself, to have that other element, other voice.
Thank you, Ilya Kaminsky. Thank you all for coming out. We're going to situate the poet right up here, so if you have an individual question or if you want him to sign your copy of the book, that's fantastic. Stop by. We'll hang out here for a while. If there are refreshments left, be sure you take them away because we paid for them for you. And make sure you mark your calendar for November 12th. Thank you. Oh, yes, if you have a copy that you borrowed, make sure you return that copy.